TaxWatch wrote a report. We called for reform. We were joined by the then mayor and by representatives of city council saying this needed to be addressed. When it was 65%, the funding ratio then was 65% and the unfunded liability was $534 billion. Today it stands at over $1.65 billion. So it's increased threefold since we called for reform in 2008. Now the funding ratio has dropped to just over 40%. So this is an issue we have been dealing with and the city of Jacksonville has been dealing with for years, but it is a statewide problem. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize that there are leaders in this room representing the mayor's office and other city officials, especially the Times Union, that have been great champions of this reform effort here in Jacksonville. And also if I didn't thank you, Madam Chair, and the members of the delegation for being here today to talk about this issue. It is extraordinarily important, and my role here is a difficult one. I follow up two great speakers who know a lot about this, great partners in these research efforts, and I have the advantage then of being able to be brief, because a lot of the background information, a lot of the important facts have been covered. But I am Robert Weissert. I'm the Chief Research Officer and General Counsel for Florida TaxWatch. I've been looking at this issue for many years, as I mentioned, here in Jacksonville and around the state, and look at all issues that affect Florida taxpayers and work policy both at the state and local level to improve the way that the government functions on behalf of the taxpayers. The unfunded liability statewide now exceeds $10.5 billion. As I mentioned, Jacksonville alone is $1.5 billion of that, $1.65 billion of that. But that number continues to grow. This is as of 2014, and that $10.5 billion continues to increase every year, but that's just a number. If you put it in perspective, comparing it to the amount of revenues collected each year from ad valorem taxation, which is just a fancy word for property taxes, that's at about $3 billion a year. So what we're talking about is a unfunded liability, amount that we owe more than what we have, that exceeds 3 times the amount that we collect in property tax collections every year. That's a statewide number. If you're following along in the printed version here, I skipped over the 175 and 185 description because I think Mr. Khan and Dr. Weissert have clearly explained what those are, so I'll skip past that. But we're talking about a significant liability that is facing Florida taxpayers, and the effects are real. We now know that rating agencies, which affect the credit ratings of cities, and therefore affect the amount of money that it costs to borrow money, and cities need to bond money for all kinds of public works projects, they're being downgraded. We've actually seen it already in Florida where someone was downgraded from an A to an A-, and the reason cited was their unfunded pension liability. So these have very real consequences. It's not just the taxpayers of tomorrow that are going to have to pay for the services of yesteryear. It's the taxpayers of today that are paying more money because of these unfunded liabilities. A lot of this is at the local level. I think Mr. Khan did a great job of saying there's enough places we can point, but there is things that need to be done at the state level. 99-1, which again he went over very carefully and I think very well, is something that needs to be addressed. 991 affects 175 and 185, the slide I skipped earlier, which are the Florida statutes that govern the police and fire pension plans in the statewide for defined benefit plans that receive insurance premium tax. But these extra benefits and these mandatory minimum benefits and the freezing are all issues that need to be addressed. And again, these have been addressed during this meeting. The pension board composition, 99-1, which is up here, the use of insurance premium tax dollars to pay for UAL, the extra benefit requirements, the Naples interpretation, disability presumption. These are all the same kind of issues that we would deal with and I would talk about, but I'll defer to what was been said. These liabilities keep going up. We're going to pass the $11 billion mark. That $10.5 billion is not static. They're going to continue to increase. And we look at the reasons why. There was a recession, and now we're recovering from with investment standpoint, certainly the stock market. But as the Leroy Collins Institute has looked into, and TaxWatch has co-written a report with them as well, this is years in the making. This is not solely because of the recession, and we have some data that shows that too. When you look back at 2005 and you look at today, or actually that's 2013, that's not even today, this is, according to Leroy Collins ratings, the number of plans that were A plans and the number of plans that were D and F plans back in 2005, and then you look at the right and that's the number of A plans and the number of D and F plans in 2013. you see a decrease of almost a third of the plans that were that were A plans are now not A plans, and the number of plans in the D and F increased from under 60 to over 180 during that time period. So we're seeing a significant shift. The left side shows that of most of the defined benefit pension plans, they were funded, and now most are not. So it's a shift in what we're seeing as far as the ability of cities to pay for these benefits. And it's really not just a matter of underfunding, or almost not a matter of underfunding, it's a matter of unsustainability. The growth in costs from these plans since 99-1 was implemented has meant that the annual pension contributions as a share of total covered payroll for general employees has increased from 18% to 25%. And this is what Dr. Weissert's slide showed, and this is a little more, not quite such a complex breakdown of that data. Just more simple that it's increased. And when you look at public safety plans, which are the majority of that UAL, when we're talking about the 10.5 billion, most of it is in public safety, police and fire pension plans. The average increase from 28 to 41. So that's a significant increase. 41 cents of every dollar being paid in payroll is going towards pensions, which is amazing as far as a percentage when you compare it to the private sector and to what other entities pay for these kind of pension levels. And you see, this is a chart that compares the police and fire, which is the red line in the middle, in average annual benefits to other types of defined benefit pension plans. We see Social Security on the far right. Military pensions is the United States military. State and local pension average. The federal pension is the United States government pension. Municipal pensions on the left are other government employees. So we see that we have a significant disconnect here. And the average total 401k also on this is about $89,000, which leads to the far right where we talk about private sector pensions would be even less than that because the payouts would be off of that principle. That's not an annual payout. That's a total. These are annual payouts, nearly $55,000. So this shows that there's an unsustainability. And when you have unsustainability, it's not a matter of throwing more money, it's a problem. It's a matter of solving the problem. So the first thing you do when you find yourself in a hole is stop digging. And that's where we need to address the characteristics of what a good reform would look like. And they are security, sustainability, and transparency and accountability. Now what we mean by security is this is not just an issue for the taxpayers, it's an issue for the employees. No matter how generous a plan may seem on paper, if it doesn't have the money to pay out, it is not a generous plan. That is the worst kind of plan you can have. One that can promise the moon but can't pay you anything in the end. And this is a system that may well be running broke. And again, it's not about funding, it's about sustainability. And so that's point number two. Transparency and accountability. When we're talking about 41 cents of every dollar of covered payroll going to pay for pensions, we're talking about obfuscation from the taxpayers. They don't know what they're paying for. What we need is a compensation to be very clear that this is what they're paying for. We need fully funded pensions, sustainable long-term pensions, so that the public understands what their tax dollars is going to for those first responders, the police and fire that are out there serving the public, but that the public can understand what they're being paid and how the money is being used. Some of the characteristics of the problems that we've seen, and I know Craig mentioned some of these, the 13th checks, where plans that are underfunded are still paying out 13th checks, even though the UAL is significant, the long-term liability of taxpayers is in the tens or hundreds of millions, and yet 13th checks are going out because of extra returns. The drop programs, this was something that was specifically mentioned in Jacksonville in 2008. The high COLAs, high multipliers, spiking, disability presumptions. These are all things that are not only allowed under 175 and 185, but really when we talk about portability, that Chair Atkins, you mentioned portability in the FRS, and we're not recommending, we don't recommend that all plans move into the FRS, but when you talk about portability, many of these are much more generous than what's provided in the FRS. So as you talk about a competition here for the best and brightest between our state and our local, which is not where the competition should exist. Competition should exist between public and private. And you make the private sector, the local benefits significantly more generous than the state benefits. Under state statute, you're really putting the state at a disadvantage vis-a-vis its workers, and that's the counties too. All those in FRS who are not receiving some of these same benefits that are allowed under 175 and 185 for local pension plans. We have unrealistic actuarial expected returns, and I know Dr. Weissert and Mr. Kahn's presentation hit on both of those. They're getting more realistic, but those numbers I give, 10.5 billion, 1.65 billion for Jacksonville, those are based on returns on investment. If those drop, then that unfunded liability shoots up. Pension holidays, collective bargaining restrictions, and of course political considerations. There are a number of reform options under 175 and 185. Again, Mr. Kahn mentioned other types of reforms that could be done, disability presumption, the Naples interpretation, etc. These are all important, but I'm going to mention some specifically under 175 and 185. And one of the major ones is to eliminate minimum benefits, to allow cities to determine what they can collectively afford or competitively afford to pay through collective bargaining. We can also reduce or eliminate the drop program. Many cities have a drop program that exceeds the 1.3% level that the FRS currently uses. Limit pensionable income, and I should mention with this that the legislature in 2011 did pass a bill restricting pensionable income to 300 hours of overtime, but we can further limit that. That did help address some of the spiking, but not all of it certainly. These should be eliminated for use in calculation under the AFC. We could cap pensionable pay. That is to say that there is a limited amount, whether it's a dollar amount or a percentage amount of someone's actual salary that they can make in retirement. Because we have seen some examples, and admittedly this one is from South Florida, but examples of individuals retiring with a $65,000 a year job whose pension benefits now are more than $180,000. Because of spiking, because of COLA, because of drop. This is an individual who is making 3 times more every year for not working than they did in any single year of work. This is an unacceptable system. This would need to be a statutory change. We can cap local contribution levels, which would again provide the locals with more control of what their potential liability is. But obviously this always needs to be done with an eye towards not only empowering the city to collectively bargain with the unions on behalf of their taxpayers, which is really the role of the cities that run these plans, but also accountability and transparency. These need to be things that would be taken into account with this kind of reform. But we do see this all over the state. I mentioned Jacksonville because we're here in Jacksonville and because we're here again in Jacksonville addressing this issue, which is one of the major ones in the state, but the Tampa Bay Times has called this a ticking time bomb. Watchdog Wire has said that places in Florida are eerily similar to predictions of Detroit. And we all know what happened to Detroit. It's not the only one. Pritchard, Alabama, San Diego, places in California that we're going towards that way. There are some major issues here that need to be addressed. And the Palm Beach Post, not necessarily known as the most conservative media outlet in the state, said the unions have frisked the taxpayers for long enough. So these are part of the overall solutions that need to be undertaken to address this problem. Some at the state level and some at the local level.